Well, I wanted to tell you about the extraordinary mail service.
Go ahead. Tell us about
Most things that they could not make were ordered from Sears, sometimes Montgomery Ward. Mama said that if you sent your order off on Monday morning on the mailboat, the warehouse was in Baltimore. There was a railroad mail car with postal workers in there that Sears would receive it before the end of the day. They would immediately fill it. You would have your package. No doubt, you didn't have to think about it. It would be back Wednesday on the mailboat on the afternoon. I thought that was really great. So she said she never gave any thought to Christmas till after my birthday, which was the 15th of December. Then she sat down with her catalog, made her order, and had it in plenty of time. And I thought that was, compared to the mail service of today, wasn't that great. That you could fully depend. Most people went to meet the mailboat, not just for the mail, but to see who came over. And did you know that the mailboat, on its way to Willis Wharf, stopped over at Upshur's Neck at Point Farm? Well, you'll be interested to know that. They had a mail hook out with a bag on it, and the mailboat pulled up there, pulled the bag from the hook, took it to Willis Wharf, and on the way back, hung it back up with their mail. And it was a very impressive place. We didn't have anything like that on the island. It was perfectly beautiful there at the Point Farm, with a white house trimmed in red and a beautiful lawn coming down to the water. It was much more elegant than anything on the island. So that was nice. Also, I want to tell you about, you know how different families have sayings and expressions.
If we hold 1 second, can I just have you introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and how long you've been here?
No, I can't write this fast. It's all great.
Your name and
My name Lillian Bowen Kennedy. I lived there until I was 7. We moved over here in 37. This house was moved in 37. So I went to first grade on the island. The village of Broadwater. There was no such thing as a Hog Island postmark. It was Broadwater. And there were only 2 of us in first grade. So he was thinning down by the time I came along. Nathan, Bell, and myself. But all the ladies had a daybed. And I think that was, and still think, that was a marvelous idea, because they could cook and lie down at the same time. And when I moved here with my mother, we talked about having a daybed. We thought it was nice. Don't you think? I do.
We had one in our kitchen when my grandmother moved off.
There you go. All the ladies had their daybed. And I still think it was a grand idea. They could watch their beans boil. And I had some wonderful bakers on there, which was amazing, because they had no thermostat. I remember them opening the stove and sticking their hand in there and feeling it. I think it was an amazing feat, with no mixer and no thermostat. Don't you? And they had wonderful cakes and other things. My mother specialized in pies more than cakes, pies and rolls and cinnamon buns. Of course, the same old fudge that everybody had.
Tell us about the fudge making that you talked to me about the other day.
The thing I was talking about was not so much the fudge making, because everybody made fudge. I was talking about the fudge stealing. The young girls would get together to have a good time and make fudge, and the boys were hanging around the house quietly, waiting to steal it, which they accomplished on a lot of occasions. But nobody got that angry. It was not that I think they just made some more or something.
So it was actually a compliment to the young girls?
No, I don't know that it was, but what made me think of it, the last preacher, which was Jack Taylor, had not been there long when there was a fudge stealing. And he was quite upset at the theft. And everybody on the island thought he was a little nuts, because they were used to it. I mean, They d- they didn't like it that he found it so upsetting, and preached about it and stuff. By the way, the church was small. It had an organ though. There was an organ in that church, and the church was always nicely decorated for Christmas. There had to be holly growing on there, as well as, of course, plenty of cedar, and I guess that's mainly what they used. The church, I told you, was at 2 in the afternoon, and even after we didn't have our own minister, and Mr. Swan came down and preached a sermon on Friday evening, we still had Sunday school at 2 in the afternoon. So we still got dressed up and went to Sunday school.
What did Mr. Swan come?
Painter, not. Well, we didn't have the population to sustain our own minister anymore by that time. And Willis Wharf was too high and mighty to let their preacher come. So the painter preacher came and enjoyed it very much. He came over on the mailboat Friday afternoon, spent the night at our house. We had a sofa that pulled out, and ate supper with us, and went back on the mailboat the next morning. It was fine. He was a very, very fine man. I think he went on to get his doctorate. And he and my mother corresponded lifelong, because Daddy didn't write any letters. I don't. I know one thing. As I said, different families have different sayings. One of ours came from a Mr. Dowdy. It seems as though it should be Ed, but I'm not sure. Was there a Sam? It was one of the two. He had a terrible toothache. His tooth was killing him, swollen. A doctor came over to visit someone else. So this Mr. Dowdy asked the doctor, could he pull his tooth? He said yes. After he saw his patient, he had an implement with which he could do it. So the doctor left the island, and somebody asked Ed, Sam, whichever it was, did you get your tooth pulled? They said he talked real fast and kind of smacked his mouth. He said, tell you the truth, I changed my mind. I changed it very suddenly. There wasn't a man in the world could have touched it. And we thought that was so funny. See, there was no anesthesia. So in our family, we would often say, I changed my mind. I changed it very suddenly. We always thought that was so funny, because he had been dying for a couple days with the thing. I also want to tell you that in those days when I was a kid, dirigibles were very much in vogue. And someone would see and they came over quite a bit. Someone would see a dirigible and holler, dirigible! And they'd run out and holler, dirigible, and everybody on the island would turn out to see the dirigible. We also turned out for every airplane. There were not that many in the early, pre-37. I mean, there's one going over here all the time. I don't run out. But people on Hog Island subscribe to a paper, usually the Philadelphia Bulletin. That was the popular one. And I was down the aisle, and I was 4. Not all the way down, but down from my house. And a lady had a paper. Of course, I couldn't read, but I still remember the headline. It was this wide and very dark, and it said, Hauptmann executed. Hauptmann was the kidnapper of the Lindbergh baby. The kidnapping was before I was born, I think. But the execution, I can guarantee you, was in 34. And I remember giving it a lot of thought and really thinking it over and deciding, well, guess it was justified if he killed, because it was an adorable baby. I had seen pictures. My next news, I always loved the news, still do, very much. My very next news story that I recall, I was in this living room. It was twilight, but we had not lit the lamps. Of course, it was oil lamps. We had one Aladdin lamp. You know one Aladdin lamp? Mm-hmm. But the others were just, bug lights, Mama called them. And course, it was never too dark on the island. It's not like Bell's Neck. You ain't gonna go walking in Bell's Neck at night, but on there you could because the lighthouse gave out these 4 rays of light circulating that you had light to go walk by and be out in the evening, which was nice. I remember it rotating through my bedroom, but it wasn't bright enough to be disturbing. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, my next news story. It was about twilight, but the lamps were not lit, and I was standing in here. The radio was on, and Prince Edward of England renounced the throne to marry the woman he loved. And I did think that one over quite a bit, too. My next news story, and this is my last one, was the disappearance of Amelia Earhart in 37. That was a biggie.
You said you had radio.
Uh-huh.
No electricity on the island.
No, the battery was totally unlike, it was half the size of a car battery. And we had an aerial, it was called then. It had to be grounded. It went out that window right there. And the aerial went out the window and was grounded. And I loved the radio. I still like radio, except I don't have any good radio. But radio was good. We had plays. There were all kinds of nice things on the radio. You know, the newscasters like Gabriel Heater, Lowell Thomas, Walter V. Kaltenborn. And every Monday night there was a movie hosted by Cecil B. DeMille himself. And believe it or not, the movies were good. It might be hard to believe. It had soap operas. Stella Dallas, Backstage Wife, Lorenzo Jones, and others. So I thoroughly enjoyed the radio.
Father, could you tell us a little more about that?
Well, because of my father, I don't know. I mean, all the men worked. Other men helped my father, and my father helped other men. But the house was moved to the marsh and sat on the marsh for 3 weeks. We lived on the marsh waiting for the right tide. So, the time.
When you say on the marsh,
On the island.
on the monitor? It was on
Yes,
the
on the 2 monitors. 2 monitors lashed together somehow. Other people say barges, but they weren't barges. They were plain old oyster monitors. So it sat on the marsh for 3 weeks, waiting for the tide. The tide came on the full moon in June of 37. And they left. And it was the most beautiful day you could imagine, with the water as smooth as glass. I did not wake up until we got to Willis Wharf. I think I told you that. So I woke up in Willis Wharf, and we, of course, came on up the creek. Had to spend the night in the marsh, because the tide was going, I mean, it wasn't full tide when we got here. Had to wait till the next morning. Couldn't do it at night. And it was a hassle. It was terrible. It was hard. Some Bradford from Oakland Park, didn't used to be Oakland Park, it used to be the Oaks, came over with a homemade tractor made from a truck. And the men had their rollers, their sledgehammers. And they managed to get the poor thing, the ground was all in corn rows. Hadn't been tended in years. Some poor soul had lost it fairly early in the Depression. There was an old house out there, played in that. There was a barn and a silo. Of course, we had to put the house where we could get it, which was right up from the marsh. And I probably told you, the men were working so hard and it was so difficult. And my mother, they got it this far, and Mama was saying, "Take it on back, Ralph. I want a big front yard." He said, "God damn it, this is just as far as she goes." And this was where, and I'm certainly glad, because I do not need a larger front yard to mow. Daddy was a character. Very much. Rick knew my father, and he knows he was a character, but a good person.
when you moved the house on the island, they jacked the house up.
You know, that's very vague with me at that tender age. I more remember them getting the cattle off than I do the house. The cattle were so wild. All the animals run free, and the cattle were so terribly wild that it took 6 men, 3 on a side, with ropes to get them aboard the Monitor, and they sold for 2.5 cents a pound on the hoof. The big event for Hog Island, I think, the really biggest thing, really more before my time, was the 4th of July. That was a biggie. A lot of people came from the mainland, and they had marvelous food. The seafood, the chickens, and from their gardens, because people did have nice gardens with corn on the cob and butter, you know, anything you want, except cantaloupes. Mama told me they couldn't raise cantaloupes on there. They had no flavor because of the sandy soil. But I think they had watermelon.
What, were you in the house?
Yes.
Can you explain that? Can you just,
I went to sleep. They left in the morning before I woke up. Everybody was in the house, including my pet cat, who was never allowed in the house. It had to be a large concession on my father's part to let Tabby in the house, because he did not like animals in the house or around his food, period. But Tabby was a good cat. I could dress him up in doll clothes and push him in my baby carriage. And so Tabby was in the house. But we were just in here when it was moved. I mean, why not?
So basically, everything was left right in the house?
Everything was left right in the house. One building out back was moved over. I had a playhouse that was not moved over. But I think it was so sad. Everybody had their home in place with their outbuildings, their garden plot, their hog pen, and to have to pick up and go and leave it was very sad.
Why did you have to leave it? Why did you leave the island if you loved it so much?
Well, it was washing away from us. We knew we were done for. Where our house sat has been underwater for years. I would never have dreamed it, because it was a fair little walk to the beach, and Mama said when she was young it was a really long walk to the beach. And on the way to the beach in my mother and my Aunt Lola's time, they looked for babies in stumps. They were told that babies came from stumps. And Mama said they'd find an old dead stump and pick through it carefully, not to hurt the baby. And she said she could not imagine why she did, because she had so many at home. Didn't care. She was the oldest. There were 5 under her. And about all she got to do was child care.
Do you remember the Red Onion?
Yes.
Do you remember going there?
Only once. Well, it was a crummy little building, and that's where they had dances. By the time I came along, they didn't have that many. But people took their children where they went. I mean, so I went to the dance at the Red Onion. Walter Carroll came in with a knife, and you would have thought it was the entire Al-Qaeda network, because people were passing their babies out the windows. I got passed out. I was scared to death. I don't think Walter was really going to do anything. He was just drunk. We did have... Aunt Lola told me that her father made beer for his friends for the 4th of July. I didn't know that, because really there was no alcohol on. I mean, we had a few drunks, but they had to come to the main. By the way, coming to the mainland was called going to the main. Were you aware of that? I can many times remember my father saying, I've got to go to the main tomorrow. And that's what it was called, going to the main. Mailboat. I don't know exactly how much, but one time I was on there. This sounds like a lie, but it's don't. I was on there with my mother, who hated being on the mailboat. I mean, she kind of got seasick. It never bothered me. But I was on there with Mama.
Mailboat.
Not much, but it could have been 50 cents or $1, one or the other.
Who was the captain of the mailboat?
In my time, it was Daddy's brother Bart.
Bart Bowen.
Mm-hmm. Well, like everybody else, he worked on the water. At one time when the scallops were plentiful, he had a shucking house. He had a really lot of animals, sheep, cattle, and some ponies, not as many ponies. He had 300 sheep. And when the 33 storm came, when that was over, he had 60. I think I have a few pictures of a few storm pictures. But they did build back up. And Daddy did pretty well. I never thought anything about the Depression at all up till we moved over here. I had a strong feeling of well-being. I always had friends to play with. And as I said, if I wanted to go visit an adult, I went. I mean, nobody seemed to mind. I don't remember anybody being rude to me. And Daddy built this house for him and my mother to get married. She had been married before and had a daughter, my half-sister. And he built it in 26, I think. And they would have been married sooner, but in those days it took 3.5 years to get a divorce. That's a long time to wait for a divorce. Really. I think it was a punishment because you weren't supposed to do it in the 20s.
Who is your half-sister?
Her name is Clarice Summers Bedsworth. She lived in Willis Wharf. She's married to William Bedsworth. And then they moved north. He was in the Ballard family, lived up there on Ballard Hill. Anyway, Sister was 7 when Mom and Daddy he had never been married before. He was 35 before he ever got married. And it was many a time I've heard Mama say to him, well, you were an old bachelor and you should have stayed one. Anyway, Sister was 7 when they got married. She always called him Ralph. And she palled around with Jack Smith, who was her uncle, but they were similar age. And on Hog Island, they just loved to tease children. That was big time sport, teasing little children.
And on Saturday or Sunday?
Well, on Saturday was bath day. All the young ladies took their bath and walked down the island. I think it was Mary Mitchell. When anyone would see her, she'd say, I had my bath. Have you had your bath? So it was like walkout time. A lot of social activities revolved around the church, I would say. It was a really big time for the teenage girls when the catalogs came. The Sears Bug catalog was at least that thick. There was a spring issue and a fall issue. And the girls would get together and tell what they were going to order, pick out their dresses. Mostly they weren't. They didn't have the money. But, you know, they were mooning and dreaming. Some things were ordered from Montgomery Ward. But they really loved it when the catalog came.
As a young girl on the island, what were your responsibilities within the home?
Over there, I don't think I had any. Over here, I had plenty. Picking up chips for the fire. When I was old, picking up the eggs. I don't remember doing any work over there. Yes, I could wash my doll clothes, which were homemade. My mother, fortunately, sewed beautifully, so my dolls were very nicely dressed. They really were. Better than now. I often say it was a depression. We were poor in hell. I dressed better then than I do now because she sewed so beautifully. And she was very particular.
Tell me about going to school.
I was in the 1st grade with Nathan. Aunt Mildred taught us. And I did fine because when I went to school over here to the Maine, I did all right. I was a little looked down upon at first. I mean, I remember the teacher, Miss Lily, had a great nephew in the class, Walter S. Elmore, that runs a used furniture place. I went through school with Walter S. He was very nice. But I remember I had an ability to spell. That was my best thing. And I remember beating Walter S. and like spelling. And she said, Walter S., are you going to let this little girl from Hog Island come over here and beat you? She also would turn up my dress hem to see how it was finished off inside. But she soon stopped that because they were finished off. And she and my mother really became good. My mother became her Sunday school. Mama worked hard for the church on Hog Island and hard for the church at Painter. It was called Pullins Chapel Methodist. And I think most everybody on there was Republican. And I also know that like all but one couple voted for prohibition. And they were very much looked down upon, the ones who did not vote for prohibition.
What about prohibition on the island? Remember?
Well, they didn't have any alcohol on there anyhow. You had to come to the main to get any alcohol. But people did. I mean, there was a few drunks that would get them some when they were over here. And I don't know, I guess they were unable to get it. But there were always people around that made homemade liquor.
Can you just describe the physical aspects of Hog Island? Like if you were going to I've never been there.
Uh-huh. Well, of course, as you know, it was a sandy soil, naturally. It was nice, though. We had grass and a garden. This house looked nicer on the island than it ever did over here because it had a pretty white picket fence around it and nice. It was up a block higher, had a nice never had a good foundation since it was here. I don't know, it was just a nice place. Most of the homes were small. There were not many large. The lighthouse keepers' houses were the nicest houses on the island. The lighthouse keeper, the head one, was a Mr. Westcott and his wife. And she was fat, which I am too, but I remember my father bought the bathtub that came out of there or something. We didn't have running water in there, but we had a bathtub with a hole in the floor. So if we really wanted a bath bad enough, we could heat a bucket of water on the stove, take it in there, haul some coal. I remember doing it. And get in the bathtub. In summertime, you couldn't dream of it in wintertime. Spending a night in the lighthouse keepers because for fear of a storm. And I remember spending another one in the basement at the Coast Guard station for fear of a storm. Well, there was one in 36. It was not as severe. However, we spent 2 nights out, I remember. And I told you, the water in the big storm, see, these are rather high baseboards. But this house was up higher than most. As I said, it was 1 cinder block higher over there. A lot of houses, it came right in the window. This one, it was up over the baseboards. And I remember my mother and father scrambling to roll up rugs and pile up furniture and stuff like that. And I do want to tell it about my grandmother and her cattle. My grandmother had 3 milk cows. I only know the name of one, Cherry. Daddy said they were not very good cows. Hallie had to drag them. They wouldn't lead and they wouldn't follow. So Hallie had to drag them every time. But anyway, when the storm came, my grandmother, a very kind, sweet, good, gentle person, all the way around, brought her 3 milk cows into the sun parlor, which was their only sitting room.
Your grandmother's name was?
Hallie Simpson Smith. Well, if you've been down to Grafton, she lived right next door.
Everybody used to call her Aunt Hallie.
Aunt Hallie. Mm-hmm. She was a good soul in this world. I'm sorry you didn't know her. She died in 73.
So could you explain just a little bit more of the island? It had trees.
It had trees, had stores, had church, had school, it had houses. No houses there was usually some space between houses. No one seemed to build right up to the other. There was a ditch that ran across. I remember catching minnofish in that and having a fish bowl of minnofish instead of goldfish. But I liked them for a little while anyway. It was just nice and pleasant.
People get along.
Very well. Surprisingly well. My mother told me that if the men would sit in the store in the evening, and if a man, he would simply say, I've got to turn my boat tomorrow. He wouldn't say, would you come or can you come? He knew they'd be there. They would just come automatically without, that was it. And that's the way it was with, they were very cooperative. They had to be. There was no help to be hired. You had to depend on your neighbor. And people, like some people had so many kids they really couldn't feed them. And other people would help out. They really would. They would even give them food and money, but not just food, money too. It was surprisingly cooperative. I don't know of any enemies, really. I can't. There may have been some, but my father didn't have any.
Tell me about the gentleman that you said that was the only thief on the island.
That was before my time, but my mother told me about it. This old man, I don't know his name, would go aboard people's boat and steal something, take their oars or whatever he wanted off their boat. So when they were missing, they didn't have any fit or get angry. They just went to his house and pulled it out from under there and went along. They knew where it was. But they didn't get that uptight about it because they knew where it was. He had put it under his house. Or at least, a lot of times people would come to the Maine to get married. So it would be there, like my mother and father. A lot of people went to Maryland for years. You could get married easier up there. I know my mother and father went to Princess Anne, spent the night at a hotel that's still there, actually. But I think it was a one-night thing. And I would like to tell you that my father built this house for the marriage. He furnished it for the marriage. He bought the furniture. He and my mother went to Benjamin's in Exmoor, which carried furniture back then. Chose what they wanted, I'm sure economically, but it was not bad. And then he was done. No improvements. He was through. He had done it. That was an open porch. Mama said it was nothing but a fly harbor, which I'm sure it was. Well, when Mama was on the island, she sold a little bit of thread, which was called a cotton, a spool of cotton, and a little stamp goods and embroidery stuff. I can remember the ladies would send their children up to Alice's to get a spool of cotton. Well, I'm sure she never made more than the most $2 a month. Everybody didn't sew, and a spool of thread lasts a while. And so Mama had her cotton money. So anything she ever wanted after that. And Daddy didn't want. He said, like, how the hell you think you're going to pay for it? With my cotton money. And that went on for years and years. And it just wasn't a word of truth then. She was knocking down on the groceries, which was fine. So when she got ready to close in the porch, he rared and pitched and cussed and said it wasn't big enough to be bothered. It was too small to close in. He got a rocker, he always rocked. He never sat in a straight chair. He got a rocker. He got a pair of binoculars. He sat on that front porch, looked out at the creek at the birds. Nicest room in the house. He did not want plumbing put in here. His mother never had any plumbing. Well, of course, Mama had plumbing. But the bathtub sat on the back porch quite a while before it got installed, and he'd kick it in about every time he went by. You know, sheep shearing on the island was a pretty big occasion. They would have them all fenced in, and I remember sitting on the fence, and it had to be done manually. I know the poor man's hand they would also brand them at the same time, the lambs, by marking their ear. And I remember sitting up on the fence watching, and it took a long time for all that sheep shearing. That was an endeavor to be done by hand. But there were great things of wool. I remember these great huge, but I don't know where they got the base. Sent some to North Carolina and had wonderful double blankets made, you know, they were really warm. All the women, I assume my mother did, I guess everybody did, saved all the goose feathers and stuff like that because one had to make feather beds and pillows. Right today, I'm sleeping on a homemade pillow. I love it. I love a homemade. I just cannot stand one of those foam rubber or fiber things. I've always been used to I know it's got to be just full of those little, what do you call them, dust mites. But I love my mother's feather. The feather beds were nice too. No matter how cold it was, you get down in there. You had about 4 quilts. Get down and it was bad going to bed. It was worse getting up. But while you were in there, it was really nice. Because the feather beds didn't get punched up and flew, at least ours didn't, every day. So you had your slot in there. You took a hot water bottle with you. You warmed your clothes by your night clothes, pajamas. We brought your pajamas and your pillow out to the living room and held them up to the stove. Mama had draperies across here so that when we would sit in here in the evening and listen to they were pulled to keep the heat in here because it was all you could do to heat one room. I mean, she made them. They were fairly heavy, like a brocade kind of thing. So we'd sit in here when it was bedtime, which was early. People went to bed early in those days. I mean, we all went at 9. Daddy might be out, but she didn't care. I mean, if she left the door open and he came in when he got ready. But a lot of times he was here and we would just sit and listen to the radio and bring out our pillow and our night clothes and get the hot water bottle ready. And but once you got warm, you stayed warm. What?
Tell us about growing up as a young child at Christmas time on the island.
You know, I don't remember that much. I think Yvonne's little book told a better story of Christmas than I could because she told about how the boys would get one thing, a harmonica or a spinning top. But I remember going around like with my doll to other people's houses and showing it. I remember the decorations here in the house. My mother decorated quite nicely. She had this, it was made of crepe paper, this large red ball she hung in the middle, and there were streamers coming from each corner to it. Somehow the Christmas tree was always in this corner because the furniture was different. She made popcorn balls, fudge. The fruit cake was made in advance. And some wine poured. She'd open that up every once in a while, pour the wine over it. Taste the wine with a teaspoon, not to get too much, but not to put bad one. I don't know. I think those lighthouses, keepers' houses, must have had generators. It seems to me that they had some electricity, but I'm not sure of that. I don't know. They were brick. They were nice.
You said that everybody on the island kind of were friendly and happy.
They were.
And that when you walked up and down the road, sometimes you stopped to get water at people's houses.
Or anything.
And that you walked in people's houses and ate sometimes.
Well, I certainly did at your grandmother's. I don't remember really eating other places, but I remember, and no one was home. I don't remember anyone. The girls were not there. I think she was home alone getting supper ready when I stopped in for a visit. And she was bringing fresh, hot, sweet potato biscuits from the oven. So I helped myself to 4, greedy thing that I was.
But I bet she was just as happy for you to have eaten a dozen.
She didn't seem to mind. She must have been a very generous, kind person, because she really didn't seem to mind. Yeah, I went and visited anybody I got ready. Now, there were some people's houses I wasn't going into, like Miss Annie George. By the way, she could not read. I mean, she was illiterate. And she would hire a schoolgirl who was up well enough in school to write letters for her. And she hired Mama, and she hired Sadie. Who else? I don't know. They're the only ones I know. She paid them the magnificent sum of a penny to write her letters.
Why did you go into the house?
Oh, I didn't like her. I was kind of scared of her. I don't know. She was just pretty old. And I think she was pretty, maybe kind of pretty grouchy. You know,
Talk about some of the other people.
well, my father's sister, Mary Carpenter. Of course, he called her Sister Mary, so I called her Sister Mary. She was a magnificent woman. She had a household of 14. She bought her flour by the bushel. I mean barrel, of course. She was the island doctor, and she was really very good. She read a lot, but she would leave her family of 14 and go spend the night with a sick person anytime it was necessary. And they could shift for themselves. Of course, some of the girls were older, and her husband was really good about that. And in the great flu epidemic, now my mother told me, in the great flu epidemic of 1918, have you heard of that? Oh, there was one. Thousands died. I mean, families were wiped out. Children were left orphaned. The great flu epidemic was really something. Not one Hog Islander died. It was there, but Sister Mary made them stay in bed and would not let them. And when Sister Mary spoke, they listened. She was rather gruff, but she knew what she was doing. And a lot died on the relapse. They went out too soon and relapsed. But no, Hog Islanders died, but they were all ones that were off on the mainland. No one. She pulled my own father through typhoid fever, which was quite deadly. And another thing, in those days, was malnutrition. A lot of people had boils. You don't get enough vitamin C, I think. You break out in boils. And she was always the one to lance the boils. She had a little tiny pocket knife that she would sterilize and do it. And funny, my daughter is a doctor. And she hadn't been, maybe she was still in training or, in her internship. Well, nobody went to college, and I guess her medicine was just self-taught. School only went to 7th grade, which was very unfortunate for some people because, like, my mother was bright, and she would love to have gone to high school. She would love to have been a teacher. She adored her teachers on the island. Almost every teacher that ever came there married a Hog Island boy or a Coast Guard boy. Almost without exception. I can think of one exception. But they were all very nice, and they would board with someone on the island. And I think they liked it. Some Coast Guard wives came and lived there.
So can you talk about,
I don't know how she learned what she did. She was a bright woman. In spite of a family of 14, she read the Philadelphia paper every day of life. She sewed. The Carpenter girls, and there was about 7 or 8 of them. There was 2 sons plus Harvey. My father lived there. He adored her. He lived there until he married my mother. Went there when his mother died. Of course, he was gone for World War I. He was drafted in that. Hated the government ever since. So I don't know how Sister Mary gained her knowledge except by practical experience and being fairly bright, or rather bright, but she was remarkable.
and you said that when she spoke to people,
Mm-hmm.
did she, just kind of,
She had
what the women knew back then?
well, with Sister Mary, they listened. She was rather gruff and forceful. Everybody listened to when Sister Mary spoke. And for my own mother, my mother was different. Mama was at least 75 years ahead of her time on women's issues. Very well. She thought it was a wonderful thing to be put in this world a man because women didn't have a very good deal. And she was like it was very rare for people to get divorced in those days. But Mama was. She wasn't one to put up with too much. Like I said, my father wanted no improvements in the house. But she wanted something, she got it. She didn't pay attention to him.
Do you know why she was divorced? And how that all came about?
Well, she was unhappy at home. And you know how a lot of girls will get married to get away from home. Her husband had lost his wife in the flu epidemic, and he had a little daughter, too, I think. And I think he married my mother to have somebody take care of his kids. She married him to get away from home.
What was his name?
Clarence Summers.
On the island?
No, he was from Baltimore. And I don't know that he was an evil man, but he was a sailing man. My mother never spoke about him very much. She never said one ill word about him, because why make my sister feel bad? I mean, when you feel that you have a lousy parent. So she really didn't talk about it. I just gleaned a little. I think Mr. Summers would take off and go sailing to Japan or something, and there she was.
Did you ever hear about the separate jet movement, or was your mother part of that?
No, over on the island, I don't think they were. She certainly was all for women's rights every way, shape, or form, and probably would have been if she had been on the mainland. I do want to show you my mother's sewing machine, because she bought it used when she was 18 or 19, and it's still in perfect running order. Mama took extraordinary. She had been so poor, she took extraordinarily good care of everything.
What were the different kind of classes on the island?
Oh, we didn't have any. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we didn't bother. Though that was, no. There weren't that many people, and there was no class consciousness. I'm still not used to that. I still don't like that. And I would not join a lot of organizations that a lot of people are thrilled to join. I would not be in the DAR. I would not be in a lot of other things.